Hello, friends. Today I will tell you about Cold War jokes. Let's start with the Great Emu Airlift. Imagine the height of the Cold War with all its secret missions and covert operations. Now picture one of those missions involving emus. Yes, the large flightless birds from Australia. The story goes that the Soviet Union, always on the lookout for innovative ways to boost their agricultural output, decided that emus might be the answer to their farming problems. They figured if these hardy birds could thrive in the harsh Australian outback, they could surely survive the Soviet climate. And so began the Great Emu Airlift. In a top-secret operation, Soviet planes were dispatched to Australia to gather as many emus as they could. You can just imagine the puzzled looks on the faces of Australian farmers as Soviet officials explained their plan. "We need your emus," they said, possibly trying to keep a straight face. The farmers, probably still recovering from the infamous Emu War of the 1930s where the birds had bested the Australian army, were more than happy to oblige. The emus were crated up and flown halfway around the world to Mother Russia. The Soviets had high hopes for their new feathered friends. They imagined emus roaming the Russian steppes, providing a new source of meat and eggs, and perhaps even helping with pest control. It was a bold, if somewhat misguided, experiment. However, as you might expect, things didn't go quite according to plan. The emus, used to the warm and dry climate of Australia, didn't take kindly to the cold Russian winters. Their natural behavior, which involved a lot of running around and causing chaos, didn't mesh well with the orderly Soviet agricultural system. The emus were less interested in cooperating and more interested in doing what emus do best, being stubborn and unpredictable. Despite the best efforts of Soviet scientists and farmers, the Great Emu Airlift was ultimately deemed a failure. The birds just couldn't adapt to their new environment, and the project was quietly shelved. The emus were left to live out their days in relative peace, probably bemused by their sudden change of scenery. The CIA's psychic spies. The CIA's Project Stargate sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel, but it was a very real and very bizarre initiative. During the Cold War, the CIA was desperate to find any edge over the Soviets, and in their quest for superiority, they turned to the paranormal. Enter Project Stargate, a secret program that explored the potential of psychic phenomena, specifically remote viewing. The goal was to train individuals to use their minds to see events, places, or information from a great distance, kind of like a psychic GPS. The idea was that these psychic spies could gather intelligence without ever leaving their rooms. If successful, they could visualize Soviet military installations, uncover hidden secrets, and predict future events. It sounds like the plot of a blockbuster movie, but the CIA took it very seriously, pouring time and resources into this unconventional method of espionage. One of the most famous participants was a man named Ingo Swann, who claimed he could see beyond the physical realm. Swann and other remote viewers were given coordinates and asked to describe what they saw. Their reports were then compared to actual satellite images or intelligence gathered through traditional means. Surprisingly, some of their descriptions were eerily accurate. For instance, Swann once described a secret Soviet submarine base in minute detail, something he had never physically seen. Despite these occasional successes, the program was fraught with controversy and skepticism. Critics argued that any accurate results were likely due to coincidence or the viewer's subconscious knowledge of publicly available information. Nonetheless, Project Stargate continued for over 2 decades, a testament to the CIA's willingness to explore even the strangest avenues for potential intelligence. The project was eventually declassified in the mid-1990s, revealing a treasure trove of documents that detailed these extraordinary efforts. While the CIA officially shut down Project Stargate, the concept of remote viewing still fascinates many. Today, it serves as a reminder of the lengths to which governments will go in the pursuit of an advantage, and how the human mind's potential can sometimes blur the lines between science and science fiction. The cat bomb. This peculiar endeavor involved the CIA's attempt to turn our feline friends into covert listening devices. It sounds like something out of a comic book, but the CIA genuinely believed cats could be trained to spy on the Soviets. The idea was simple yet utterly outlandish. Implant microphones and transmitters into cats, then let them roam freely to eavesdrop on sensitive conversations. The CIA spent around $20 million on this project, hiring veterinarians to perform the delicate surgeries needed to transform these ordinary felines into high-tech spies. The first mission was to eavesdrop on a conversation happening outside the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. A specially trained cat, equipped with all the necessary gear, was released near the target. Unfortunately, things took a tragic and absurd turn when the cat was promptly hit by a taxi. The operation ended as quickly as it began, with the CIA realizing that controlling a cat, let alone using one for espionage, was not as easy as they had hoped. Despite its failure, Operation Acoustic Kitty highlighted the extreme measures and creative lengths to which intelligence agencies would go during the Cold War. The idea that cats, known for their independence and often erratic behavior, could be trained to follow complex instructions was overly optimistic, to say the least. Yet it shows the imaginative and sometimes desperate attempts to gain an edge over the enemy. Operation Acoustic Kitty became a legendary example of Cold War absurdity. It also underscores the unpredictability of using animals in covert operations. Imagine trying to get a cat to do anything on command, let alone infiltrate an embassy. The project's failure was perhaps inevitable, given the nature of its unlikely agents. Looking back, Operation Acoustic Kitty serves as a humorous reminder of the era's blend of seriousness and silliness. It shows that even in the world of high-stakes espionage, not all plans are as cunning as they seem. While the project didn't yield the desired results, it certainly left a lasting legacy as one of the quirkiest espionage attempts in history. The Moscow Signal. In the 1960s, the U.S. Embassy in Moscow began detecting an unusual microwave signal targeting the building. Naturally, this raised a few eyebrows, as the Americans suspected it might be some kind of Soviet mind control experiment or a sophisticated espionage effort. The signal, dubbed the Moscow Signal, wasn't just a blip on the radar. It was consistent and persistent. The Americans scrambled to understand what was happening, launching an internal investigation that was equal parts serious science and wild speculation. They tested everything, from the embassy staff's health to the building's structural integrity. Some even joked that the Soviets were trying to cook their diplomats from the inside out, like a Cold War microwave dinner. Theories about the signal's purpose abounded. Was it an attempt to eavesdrop on confidential conversations by turning the walls into giant microphones? Or perhaps a sinister plot to manipulate the minds of American diplomats, making them more susceptible to Soviet influence? The uncertainty only fueled the paranoia that was already rampant during the Cold War. The U.S. response was multifaceted. They installed protective shielding in the embassy, effectively turning it into a giant Faraday cage to block the microwaves. They also initiated Operation Pandora to study the effects of microwave radiation on humans, which led to some rather alarming and sometimes exaggerated conclusions about potential health risks. Despite all the efforts, the exact purpose of the Moscow Signal remains shrouded in mystery. Some believe it was simply a sophisticated method of jamming U.S. communications, while others maintain it was part of a broader psychological warfare strategy. What is clear, however, is that it exemplifies the era's mix of high-stakes intrigue and almost comic absurdity. The space beer battle. Picture this. It's 1975, and tensions between the US and the Soviet Union are at an all-time high. Amidst this intense rivalry, astronauts and cosmonauts found a surprising common ground beer. During the Apollo-Soyuz test project, a joint space mission, they decided to engage in a friendly competition to see whose beer was superior. The Americans brought their Budweiser, while the Soviets showcased their Baltica. Now imagine these space pioneers, floating weightlessly in their spacecraft, cracking open cold ones and conducting the first intergalactic beer tasting. The scene was less about espionage and more about camaraderie, showing that even in the vast, cold expanse of space, the human spirit forges unexpected connections. As they sipped their beers, debates ensued. The Americans, proud of their Budweiser, touted its smooth, crisp taste. The Soviets, equally proud, praised the rich, full-bodied flavor of Baltica. The tasting turned into a lively discussion, filled with laughter and mutual respect, a stark contrast to the usual Cold War hostilities. But this wasn't just a light-hearted diversion. It highlighted an important aspect of the Cold War, the human element. Despite being from rival superpowers, these astronauts and cosmonauts shared a common bond. They were explorers, pioneers pushing the boundaries of human knowledge and capability. The space beer battle was a moment of unity in an era defined by division. Back on Earth, the story of the space beer battle became a symbol of the potential for peace and cooperation. It showed that even in the most unlikely of places, like a spacecraft hurtling through the void, people could find common ground. It also underscored the absurdity of the Cold War, where even something as mundane as beer could become a point of contention and collaboration. So, who won the space beer battle? Opinions were divided, with each side firmly believing their brew was superior. But perhaps the real victory was the realization that, despite their differences, they were more alike than they were different. They were all humans, floating in a tiny metal can in the vastness of space, sharing stories, laughter, and a drink. The fake moon landing theory. Despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, some people believed and still believe that the US faked the moon landing to assert dominance over the Soviet Union. Let's dive into this peculiar tale of skepticism and imagination. The idea that the moon landing was staged in a Hollywood studio has captivated conspiracy theorists for decades. According to this theory, in 1969, as the space race was reaching its climax, the US realized it was falling behind the Soviets. So instead of actually landing on the moon, they decided to fake it. They allegedly hired top directors, special effects experts, and actors to create a convincing lunar landscape. Supporters of this theory point to various anomalies in the moon landing footage. They claim that the flag planted by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin appears to be waving in the wind, which is impossible since there's no atmosphere on the moon. They also argue that the shadows in the photos are inconsistent and that the lighting looks suspiciously like studio lighting. However, these claims have been thoroughly debunked by experts. The flag, for example, had a rod to hold it up, causing it to appear as if it was waving. The shadows were affected by the uneven lunar surface and the single light source, the sun. And the lighting discrepancies can be explained by the unique properties of moon dust and the reflective qualities of the lunar surface. Despite these explanations, the fake moon landing theory remains a favorite among conspiracy enthusiasts. It highlights the intense distrust and paranoia that characterized the Cold War. The idea that a government could pull off such an elaborate hoax speaks to the era's climate of secrecy and suspicion. Ironically, the Soviets themselves never questioned the authenticity of the moon landings. They had their own tracking systems and were fully capable of verifying the mission's success. If anyone had reason to expose a fake, it would have been them. Yet, they acknowledged the American achievement, further undermining the conspiracy theory. The fake moon landing theory is a fascinating example of how myths and misinformation can persist, even in the face of clear evidence. It also serves as a reminder of the extraordinary lengths to which people will go to explain the seemingly impossible. While it's fun to imagine a secret Hollywood set with astronauts in costume, the truth is far more impressive. Humanity really did take that giant leap for mankind. The dead drop spies. Espionage during this era wasn't just about high-tech gadgets and covert missions. Sometimes, it involved the most mundane objects. Dead drops were a classic spy technique where secret messages or items were hidden in everyday locations, often right under the noses of unsuspecting civilians. Picture this: a spy casually strolling through a park, seemingly enjoying the day. But instead of taking in the scenery, they're on a mission to drop or retrieve secret information. The beauty of dead drops was their simplicity and discretion. A hollowed-out rock, a fake tree stump, or even a loose brick in a wall could serve as a hiding spot. One particularly clever drop involved a hollowed-out nickel that contained microfilm. This tiny nickel was the brainchild of Soviet spy Rudolf Abel, who used it to pass messages to his contacts in the US. It seemed like the perfect plan until a young paperboy accidentally discovered the hollow coin when it wouldn't fit into a vending machine. The boy's curiosity led to the coin being examined, and eventually the FBI got involved, unraveling a network of espionage. The beauty of dead drops was that they minimized the need for face-to-face contact, reducing the risk of exposure. Spies could leave a message in a predetermined location, and their contact would retrieve it later, often days or weeks apart. It was like an invisible game of hide-and-seek, where the stakes were incredibly high. However, this method wasn't foolproof. Spies had to ensure that the dead drops remained undisturbed and unnoticed by the general public. Imagine the awkwardness of retrieving a hidden message from a tree hollow only to find a squirrel has made it its new home. Or worse, a passerby accidentally discovering the drop, as in the case of the paperboy and the nickel. The dead drop technique exemplifies the ingenuity and resourcefulness of Cold War spies. It also highlights the era's blend of high stakes and occasional absurdity. The concept of using such ordinary objects for espionage adds a layer of intrigue and humor to the otherwise serious business of spying. The disappearing diplomat. In 1957, Abel, a Soviet spy operating under deep cover in New York City, was arrested by the FBI. His real name was William Fisher, but he lived as Rudolf Abel, posing as an unassuming artist while secretly relaying information back to the KGB. Abel's story took a dramatic turn when he seemingly vanished from the streets of New York. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or a Houdini-like escape. It was a sophisticated extraction operation by the Soviets. Abel was captured and tried, but his story doesn't end there. The real twist came with his capture, trial, and eventual exchange for American U-2 pilot Francis Gary Powers. Powers had been shot down over Soviet airspace and was captured by the Russians, creating a diplomatic nightmare. In a move straight out of a spy novel, the two nations negotiated a swap, Abel for Powers. The exchange took place on the Glienicke Bridge in Berlin, famously known as the Bridge of Spies. This dramatic scene was filled with tension as both sides stood on edge, waiting for the swap to be completed. The cloak and dagger tactics of Abel's extraction and the subsequent spy swap highlighted the high stakes and intense rivalry of the Cold War. It was a rare moment where the covert world of espionage intersected with public spectacle, and it captured the imagination of people worldwide. Despite his capture, Abel's calm demeanor and loyalty to his cause made him a legendary figure in the annals of espionage. The story of his disappearance and the spy swap is a fascinating reminder of the intrigue and drama that defined the Cold War. It also shows that sometimes truth is indeed stranger than fiction. That's all. Thank you for your attention. See you soon.